Yo, what's going on guys? Abby here. Today I want to talk about a little bit more of a controversial topic, as I want to talk about Deepwoken's PvP. Now, there's been a lot of videos by different YouTubers and content creators saying that Deepwoken's PvP is in the worst state it's ever been. Today, I'd like to tell you guys about my take on this whole situation and some reasons as to why I feel this way. I, like many others, believe that Deepwoken's PvP is in not too great of a state right now. But why is that? Why is it that now of all times, Deepwoken's PvP is at its absolute worst? Well, let's get right into it. To start, I've been watching a lot of Grandmasters fight, alright? And I've noticed that the vast majority of them are doing a very similar thing. They're kind of just staying back very passively and not really pushing their opponent. And that honestly makes sense, since right now it's very easy for you to defend yourself, and from there your opponent can just punish you for playing too aggressively. Just think about how the meta has evolved, alright? Nowadays, everyone is prioritizing things like posture on their builds so they can guard against enemy attacks. Things like erudition so they can vent out of combos whenever they need, and so they can chip at their opponent with mantras. And of course, more than anything, people are prioritizing HP so that no matter what happens, they can just survive for longer. All of these features just show that Deepwoken has shifted into a more defensive game. And also, in general, it's easier to stay defensive and keep away from your opponent than it is to get aggressive. And this leads to people thinking that today's PvP is much less skill dependent than verse 1, for example. All I'm saying is that today, people are playing much more defensive and slowly than they ever have in the past. You can even see this in the types of builds that have been meta recently. Most builds nowadays heavily prioritize defense over offense. Things like 600 HP attunementless, where their main goal is just to survive. Builds like mage builds, where they sit away and let their mantras do the majority of the damage, so they don't have to risk their own HP. If we compare this to verse 1, where the builds and PvP were much more different, it's very clear how the meta has shifted. Watch any verse 1 fight and you'll notice that everyone is fighting right next to their opponent, sitting there face to face, parrying, blocking, and trying to play aggressive. Because in verse 1, this was the best way to fight your opponents. You get up, get close, and beat them with genuine skill. Also, what made this possible back in verse 1 was the amount of offensive options you had as a player. All my homies who played back then for sure remember flourish stacking, where if you got aggressive enough and managed to flourish someone, you could land a huge burst of damage. This type of mechanic rewarded getting aggressive, and by no means was that the only mechanic available to offensive players. There was things like the Konga's clutching tech, where you could literally fly around your opponent. There was faster M1 fading, which made it much easier to get around your opponent's parrying. And now notice how none of these mechanics exist in verse 2. And we wonder why people are playing super defensively. There's no incentive to get aggressive and fight upright with your opponent, when you could just stay back, save your HP, and chip them out. To me, it's pretty obvious that this shift in PvP meta has really hurt the game. It makes the builds much more one-dimensional, it makes fights much less engaging and fun, and it lowers the skill ceiling to the point where being genuinely skilled isn't even that big of a deal, since having a better build is much more important than being better at the game. As for how to fix this, I really can't suggest anything, since this is a massive problem that addresses the entire game. I would love to hear in the comment section what you guys have to say on this debate, since I know opinions vary a lot, and I think everyone's word matters. If you guys have any concerns or disagreements with anything I said, please make sure to leave it down below. And with that, that's gonna be it for me. Until next time.